Magnetism, a physical phenomenon produced by the motion of electric charge, resulting in attractive force between objects. The ability to attract and charm people. Other words for magnetism include allure, attraction, fascination, enchantment, seductiveness, charm, magic, spell, and charisma. This video is going to make you magnetic to beautiful women using the occult secret teachings of Plato. When you walk outside after watching it, you will notice that women are looking at you with newfound interest and attraction. Everywhere you go, girls are trying to get your attention. You've become irresistible to them. When you're at the gym, athletic, yoga bunny girls are coming up and working out beside you, even though there's many other empty spaces. When you're at bars or parties or events, girls look for any excuse to talk to you and make conversation. They slyly try to squeeze up next to you and put their boobs in your face. And when you are radiating this kind of magnetism and charisma, getting a girl to come home and sleep with you is extremely easy and effortless. You basically don't have to try at all. Wherever you go, girls are coming up to you and flirting with you shamelessly. They're making sexual innuendos, talking about how hot and sexy you are. They're trying to get you drunk. They're joking that you should come and have a threesome with them and their hot friend. And this kind of intense personal magnetism is yours whenever you want it. All men have the capacity to become magnetic to women, regardless of their looks, height, age, ethnicity, or any other perceived limitation or flaw in the world of physical matter. And that is because this magnetism, if you choose to switch it on, emanates from a part of you that is not physical in the sense we normally mean. It comes from what ancient knowledge called your soul, or what modern science calls the electromagnetic field of the heart. Now, you've probably heard that techniques like semen retention or increasing your testosterone levels will give you this greater animal magnetism to women, and that's true. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. And in this video, we're going to be going much deeper into this topic of becoming supernaturally magnetic and irresistible to women. And this is going to take us, believe it or not, directly into the philosophy and the secret teachings of Plato. Most people know Plato as a philosopher from ancient Athens, whose work lies at the very foundation of Western civilization. What people do not realize is that Plato, aside from being a philosopher, was also a mystic, a religious visionary, and an initiate of secret societies. And Plato had not only an exoteric teaching, which is the philosophy he's become famous for, he also had an esoteric teaching, a secret teaching that was for his closest disciples only. And as I'm going to show in this video, a very large part of this secret teaching of Plato touched on precisely this idea of magnetism. Plato was actually using certain techniques that give you the ability to unlock supernatural powers of charisma and personal magnetism, and this secret teaching is actually the very heart of the whole Platonic philosophy. But to understand it, we have to forget everything we know or think we know about Plato. You know, if you ever took a class in college about Plato or even watched some YouTube videos about him, you might have got the impression that he's this kind of dry, boring, analytical philosopher who's all about, cold hard logic and reason. And this is absolutely wrong. In actual fact, the absolute essence of the Platonic philosophy is not reason or logic at all, but what Plato called divine madness. This is a state of electrifying passion and inspired ecstatic possession which is neither reasonable or logical. This divine madness allows the man who experiences it to access higher states of consciousness and to perceive the highest forms of beauty and truth. But that's not all. According to Plato, if we read him closely, this divine madness also gives you access to extraordinary hidden powers and possibilities. And one of these powers is just this irresistible charisma and spell-binding personal magnetism that I've been talking about. It's a kind of magnetism which, according to Plato, in his own words, gives you the ability to make rich, young, and beautiful people into your slaves. And Plato principally shows us this in the way that he describes the main character in all of his dialogues, Socrates. Socrates was obviously Plato's teacher and master, but he was also the main character or the hero of most of Plato's works. And in order to understand Plato's secret teaching of magnetism, which is implicit rather than explicit, the first place we need to look is how he describes Socrates' effect and influence on the people around him, which is extremely unusual. Socrates seems to have almost been able to hypnotize people at will. He was an extraordinarily seductive man, despite his very unimpressive physical appearance. Socrates possessed what is nowadays called a reality distortion field, and other characters frequently describe him in this way. Now, it's important to bear in mind here that, as I said, Socrates was not a good-looking man at all. On the contrary, he was known to be short, bald, chubby, with a pug nose. He almost looked like a little pig. Yet despite this, Socrates is constantly described as having almost magical powers to seduce and charm people practically against their will. Now, there's many examples of this in Plato, but I want to single out one in particular. It's in the Symposium, where a character called Alcibiades is describing Socrates' extraordinary powers to fascinate and mesmerize people. Now, to understand this passage and what it really means in the context of the times, we need to address the elephant in the room here, which is that in ancient Athens, virtually all these men were bisexual, and they mostly preferred having sex with boys over women.
This sounds very gay.
Yes, it does. But we need to understand this right now, because otherwise what Plato is really trying to convey here about Socrates' personal magnetism won't really make sense to us. So the context you need to know here is that Alcibiades is this, young boy, probably in his late teens or early 20s, who is widely perceived as being extremely beautiful and desirable by these older men. Alcibiades was also extremely rich. He was from a very rich, powerful, noble family in Athens. And Alcibiades describes Socrates as follows. He says Socrates is not good looking at all, but instead he compares him to a satyr. And yet, despite his ugliness, this little imp of a man has almost demonic powers of persuasion and charisma. So much so that whenever he speaks, it brings Alcibiades to tears. And Alcibiades goes on to say that he even tried to seduce Socrates on multiple occasions, that he was chasing Socrates, but Socrates wouldn't give in. And he says, basically, it's actually very funny, it was absurd. It was as if I was the old man and he was the boy. And yet Socrates refused to sleep with him. And Alcibiades says that finally, after all this, he was so intoxicated by Socrates' charisma that, in his own words, I became his slave. Now again, you have to understand here, in this time and place, to these people, Alcibiades is like a perfect 10, okay? And so when he's trying to seduce Socrates, even to the point of, he describes at one point literally getting Socrates alone in bed with him one night, but Socrates still won't have sex with him no matter how much he begs. This is meant to come across to us as weird, okay? It's meant to seem highly strange and unusual. The equivalent of this in our day would be like if you had some crazy hot 19-year-old blonde cheerleader who's also a supermodel, and on top of that, she's rich and her family's worth billions. And so imagine, you have this rich billionaire, perfect 10 teenager girl who's trying to seduce a poor, fat, ugly, short, bald, pug-nosed little man who's decades older than her, but the man is repeatedly telling her no. It's even to the point where she gets him into bed with her and is literally begging him for sex, and he's still turning her down. That's what this story is meant to signify, okay? If you translate it into modern terms. And so again, Plato is trying to convey something very, very strange to us about Socrates here. Number one, he's trying to show us that Socrates had almost magical powers, what Alcibiades describes as literally spellbinding personal magnetism, in his words. He has a mysterious energy which makes him utterly fascinating and irresistible to these young, beautiful people, despite being physically very ugly. And number two, even more importantly, if you read between the lines, this passage is not just describing Socrates' magnetism, it's also a veiled, camouflaged description of the very technique he was using to acquire that magnetism in the first place. And can you guess what that technique is? If you watch my other videos, you probably can. The technique is, of course, semen retention. Socrates was practicing semen retention, and this was the secret to his legendary magnetism and influence. As a matter of fact, Socrates was actually so charismatic as a result of doing this technique that the state literally had to put him to death eventually, because they believed the hypnotic influence he had over the youth made him dangerous to society.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
And the Athenian politicians are often criticized for this, like, how dare you kill Socrates? He was such a wise man, he didn't want to hurt anyone. But, there's two sides to every story, and it's a problem of hindsight, right? Like, from our perspective, we know Socrates was always a man of peace, but, from their point of view, it was not at all clear that Socrates wouldn't have eventually decided to use this magical, charismatic power he possessed to build an army and take over the state. This had been done before by other charismatic men in Greece at that time, known as the tyrants. And one of Socrates' own disciples, Critias, later did become just such a tyrant. What's more, Socrates himself, in his own words, according to his own teachings, says philosophers should be kings. It's the famous doctrine of the philosopher king in Plato's Republic. So, not only did he have this incredible magnetism, not only did he have this cult-like hold over young people, and particularly over young, rich, powerful nobles, but he's even expounding a doctrine which gives a complete and fully thought out framework and justification for why a philosopher, like himself, should seize power. So, from the perspective of the Athenian rulers, this is no joke here. This could have been a serious problem for them down the line, for all they knew. So anyway, the point is, Socrates had this spellbinding charisma. And those are the words Plato literally uses, spellbinding, meaning his charisma is occult or supernatural in origin. It allows him to cast spells on people and take over their minds as if by hypnosis. And we see this not just in the symposium, but also in many other dialogues. Wherever Socrates goes, he instantly becomes the center of attention. Young people, both men and women, immediately flock to him. They want to hear him. They want to be near him. And when they hear him speak, they become entranced, as Plato says. And as I said, if you read Plato closely, he actually gives you the technique, the way that Socrates obtained this kind of magnetism. The technique was semen retention, sexual alchemy. Now, if you ask Google or ChatGPT, did Socrates practice semen retention? It will tell you, oh, no, blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence for that at all. And yet, read the text. It's literally right there in black and white. You have this scene where an extremely beautiful young person has gotten Socrates into bed alone and is begging him for sex, and Socrates is telling them no. Now, what is that other than semen retention? That's literally what it is. But people are so stupid and so literal-minded, and they need to have everything spelled out for them literally, and because there's no explicit line where Plato says, don't ejaculate or retain your seed, well, people will say, well, there's no evidence at all that he ever suggested anything like semen retention. Well, no, actually, it's right there under your nose if you just read the text, and particularly if you read between the lines of what the text is really suggesting. Socrates is practicing semen retention, celibacy, and this is the secret of his magnetism, the strange power he has to appear beautiful to young and attractive people, almost like an induced hallucination. And in another of Plato's books, the Phaedrus, this is made even more explicit. And here, Plato not only refers to semen retention, but he even alludes to a very advanced form of semen retention, which we would today call tantric sex, or non-ejaculatory sex. So I've put the paragraph on screen here. You can read it yourself if you like. Now bear in mind, this is written in very flowery language. It doesn't talk about sex directly. It's not explicit about things. It doesn't mention, body parts or genitalia or anything like that. But again, if you read this passage closely, and if you read it several times, you'll find that what it's actually saying, what it's actually describing, is a form of tantric sex, non-ejaculatory sex. What Plato says here is that the wise man will lie with his lover and he'll enjoy touching them, stroking them, and so on, but he won't consummate the relationship. In other words, he won't ejaculate. And he says that other people, of course, won't be able to restrain themselves, and this is not as good. That the best way, the highest course of action, is to indulge in love, caresses, and so on, but not allow yourself to ejaculate. Now, that's Tantra. That's tantric sex. It's exactly the same technique of non-ejaculatory sex with a wisdom consort that's described by the Tantric Buddhists or by the Taoists, the sexual alchemists of ancient China. You can read more about those secret Taoist sexual practices of semen retention in books like Cultivating Male Sexual Energy by Mantak Chia. But actually, Plato is talking about the exact same thing. The only difference is that he's not as explicit about it as those Eastern traditions are. He doesn't overtly describe body parts and genitals and what to do with them the way the Tantric or Taoist masters did. Instead, he disguises the secret in indirect, allusive language. And that's why most people miss this, because they're too literal-minded. They miss the significance of what's actually being conveyed here between the lines. Now, Plato explicitly says this practice of tantric sex is a way to induce what he calls divine madness. And Plato distinguishes between two kinds of madness. The first is the madness we know, what we call mental illness, schizophrenia, psychosis, etc. But Plato distinguishes this from another kind of madness, which he calls divine madness, and which he says is actually the highest state of consciousness a person can attain. And Plato says explicitly that of these four kinds of divine madness, erotic madness, the madness of lovers, is the highest and best form of all. Now, how do you induce divine madness of the erotic variety? Obviously, the best and fastest way is to do it with semen retention. When you abstain from ejaculation for several weeks, it charges your body with an enormous amount of sexual energy, sexual electricity. And as I've talked about in my video Red Magic, this electric current of sex energy which you get from doing semen retention creates an electromagnetic field around your body. And this field, I believe, is what makes you magnetic and much more attractive to young, hot women when you do these practices. If you want to see more about that, watch my video Red Magic and maybe also my video on sexual aura. So if we read between the lines here, Plato is really saying the exact same thing as I said in that Red Magic video. Namely, a period of celibacy creates a current in your body that produces an electrical field. And this field makes you highly magnetic and charismatic to people, particularly, in my experience, to women who tend to be more sensitive to this, I think. As it said, women have antennas that men do not. And this is Plato's secret teaching, or at least it's one part of his secret teaching. We're going to get into the full secret teaching in just a minute. But the point is, when you take all of this together, it becomes clear that Plato and or Socrates was what I call a red magician. In other words, he was using semen retention and tantric sex practices in order to induce within himself states of divine madness. And this divine madness not only allows you to perceive a higher dimension of reality, which most people can't, but it also makes you magnetic, radiant. It gives you the power to fascinate and mesmerize people. And one of the biggest clues to this is actually in the very title of the dialogue itself, where Plato describes this semen retention practice. The dialogue is called the Phaedrus. Now, it's called the Phaedrus because the character Socrates is talking to in this dialogue is named Phaedrus. However, there's also a double meaning here, because because the word phaedrus in Greek literally translates to radiant. So Plato is describing semen retention or tantric sex in a book which is literally called Radiant or Radiance. Why? Because he's giving us a clue here. He's giving us a hidden message for those who have ears to hear it. The secret he's hinting at is that these practices of semen retention or tantra make you radiant. They give you what's called the aura. They are what give you animal magnetism, this same hypnotic animal magnetism which Socrates is frequently described as having. The key word here is radiance. To quote Plato scholar Christina Scheffer, that word, radiance, is really the heart of the whole Platonic philosophy, in her words. Philosophy, for Plato, is not about becoming this logical, cold, grey-haired old man. It's about transformation, transforming yourself, becoming radiant, becoming magnetic, becoming, quite literally, supernatural or divine. It's another word Plato continually uses. So in other words, Plato is really a magician or a wizard. He is much closer to Merlin or Apollonius of Tyana than he is to being some dry, boring philosophy professor or even one of the tedious Stoic philosophers who came later. And this is Plato's secret teaching. It's not about logic. It's not about the intellect. It is about becoming radiant, developing this aura, which is, of course, simply another word for radiance. Now, the words radiance and aura both refer to light. They refer to rays of light that emanate from an object, such as the sun, for example. And what I'm suggesting is that when you do these practices, you don't literally emanate light, like it doesn't turn you into some kind of radioactive glowing alien like Mr. Burns. But the light, the aura, the radiance that Plato and many others describe is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for electromagnetism. This work, semen retention, generates a very strong current of electricity inside you, and this electricity produces a field, a literal electromagnetic field around your body. This field is what makes you magnetic and attractive to people, particularly to women, and it also gives you the power to do magic. This is what all magic and all occult powers are really about. They all boil down to electromagnetism. However, of course, in the ancient world, they didn't really have a concept of electromagnetism. They didn't have a concept of a field in the sense that we mean. They didn't know about things like electricity or radio waves. What they did understand, however, was light, illumination, radiance, because they could see it. They could see the sun, they could see the stars, they could see the way these things glowed, the way they emanated beams of light. And they also knew, or could at least sense, that these objects, stars and suns, are magnetic to the planets around them. They hold the planets around them in orbit. And so when the ancients talked about radiance or aura, or even when they talked about the astral body, meaning the star body, they weren't speaking literally. They weren't saying you become a star or that you start emitting actual beams of light from your body. They were using these things as metaphors for the effect that these techniques generated, for the kind of transformation that it produces in you, which is that you become radiant to other people. You become magnetic to them. You have this aura. And in Western art, this is even depicted as the halo, which obviously everyone is familiar with. All saints and all holy men or women are depicted as having this halo. And the halo, again, it's really just a metaphor for the electromagnetic field. This real physical field of very attractive energy that people who develop their powers in this way come to possess. Now, the only mistake they made is that they always put the halo around the head, whereas in fact, we now know that the aura, the electromagnetic field your body generates, it actually comes from the heart, not from your head. And that's a scientific fact. This is what the science of magnetocardiography is all about. And it's interesting, the fact that Western art wrongly locates the aura as emanating from the head and not from the heart is actually a big clue as to what one of the biggest blind spots of Western thinking has always been. Namely, there's been this strong emphasis on logic, rationality, and the mind over and above the heart, the seat of emotions. By contrast, however, the ancient Egyptians, they famously have the myth of the weighing of the heart after death, and that's because the heart is, in fact, as science now knows, the organ from which your electromagnetic field emanates. And in a sense, you almost could say that this electromagnetic field is literally your soul. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's very close. You could say this EMF field is like the outward manifestation of your soul. It's almost like the clothing of your soul, so to speak. So, to sum up what we've said so far, Plato is a red magician. He is teaching you how to use semen retention or tantra to achieve higher states of consciousness and to become supernaturally charming and magnetic to other people, a state he described as radiance, or what we call aura or animal magnetism. However, this is really just the tip of the iceberg. The hidden truth of Plato's system of philosophy is that it is really a system of magic. And the symbol, the key to understanding Plato's whole philosophy, his whole magical system, is this: the all-seeing eye. this famous or infamous symbol which you are probably already familiar with. If you live in the United States, it's even printed on your currency. Now, a lot of people are very curious about what this symbol really means. They're curious especially about the hold this symbol appears to have had historically on elites. And in just a moment, I'm going to reveal that. I'm going to trace the hidden links between Plato and occult secret societies like the Freemasons and the Illuminati, who some people claim pull the strings in our world. I'm also going to show you why this symbol is actually referring to magnetism. And when you understand the three elements that compose this symbol, you will become irresistibly magnetic and sexually attractive to beautiful women. That's coming up in just a second, but first, to thank you for getting this far into the video, I want to give you a free gift right now. It's a short little book I wrote called The Ultimate Guide to Making Women Approach You. And in this guide, I'm going to reveal 5 magnetism hacks that make girls approach you, guaranteed, no matter your looks, age, or money. If you've already got this free gift from me, feel free to skip forward in the video. But if you haven't, then click the link in the description right now so you can download this free guide. So pause the video now, click the link in the description, and then put in your name and email address on the next page, and I will email you this free book right now. People love this book. It's already getting tons of guys approached by women, and getting approached is easy. Again, you just need to do a couple little tweaks, and you can do these right away, and you'll start getting approached almost instantly. And obviously it goes without saying, when the girl approaches you first, getting her into bed is incredibly easy because she's the one doing all the chasing. She's trying to impress you and you have all the power. This makes having sex with new girls incredibly simple, and then you can keep her around as a buddy, girlfriend, whatever you want. You can even use this to build your own harem. So if you want to make that happen, very simple, click the link in the description now, download this free book, read it, and start getting approached by women like you're a celebrity today. When you put in your email address, you're also going to be signed up for my free email newsletter. Guys love the newsletter. It's where I put all my best content that I can't put here on YouTube because it's too controversial or too sexually explicit. So make sure you sign up for that by clicking the link below. And once again, when you do that, you're also going to get this free book as a complimentary gift. So do that right now. Pause the video now, click the link in the description, put in your name and email. It should take you 5 seconds. And as soon as you've done that, come right back here, unpause the video, and let's get back into it. Okay, so this video is about how to become magnetic to women using the occult teachings of Plato, the secret teachings of Plato. And these secret teachings are like the layers of an onion. You know, so far we've talked about one layer, which is that Plato actually talks about semen retention as a way to induce altered states of consciousness and to become magnetic. But we're now going to talk about an even deeper layer of this onion, and this is that Plato's system of philosophy is in fact a system of magic, and the key to understanding Plato's magical system is in this famous symbol, the all-seeing eye. Now, many people have speculated about the true meaning of this symbol for centuries, and as I said, if you're American, it's literally on your currency. This is because the Freemasons, an occult secret society who use the symbol prominently, virtually founded the United States. 9 of the signatories of the US Constitution were Masons, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. And so there's a huge mystery here. You know, what did these guys actually believe? What is this all really about? And it's kind of tantalizing, you know, no one really knows, and yet it's right there on the money. There's also the famous mystery of the Illuminati. Illuminati meaning the illuminated ones. The Bavarian Illuminati was another secret society with strong ties to the Masons. Now, right away, what does this word illumination remind you of? Radiance. The same radiance which one Plato scholar identifies as the heart of the whole Platonic philosophy. And that's because what this symbol means, what illumination really means, and what Plato was writing about are all really referring to the same thing. So in that vein, in the rest of this video, I'm going to reveal to you the secret teaching of Plato, of which tantric sex is only the very tip of the iceberg. And in discovering this secret teaching, you will also discover finally, once and for all, the real meaning of this famous symbol of the all-seeing eye. Secret which I believe many high-ranking members of the Masons and the Illuminati themselves did not and still do not fully understand. And before I reveal this, I want to put it on record that I'm not suicidal, and if you ever hear that I was found to have killed myself with 6 gunshots to the back of the head while handcuffed, well, it might have been because of this video. Now, all this talk of secret societies, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, secret occult orders believed to be running the world behind the scenes. What most people do not realize is that these things are not new. In fact, there was a kind of Illuminati of sorts in Plato's day, and even before then, they were known as the Greek and Roman mystery cults. Pretty much everything we know about secret societies, from the Freemasons, such as, the secret rituals, the initiation, being sworn not to talk about what's revealed on punishment of death, all of this actually traces back to the Greek and Roman mystery cults. In Greece, there were 3 main mystery schools: the Dionysian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, and the Eleusinian mysteries. And the Eleusinian mystery school was the one most famous and prominent in Athens at the time that Socrates and Plato were active there. And most historians now agree that both Plato and Socrates were almost certainly initiates of this cult. Plato's work, in particular the Phaedrus, the very same book we've been discussing, is rife with coded messages and hidden meanings which scholars believe are clear references to the Eleusinian mystery school. Now, exactly what the mystery cults taught or believed is still not clear, because again, Athenians who became initiated were forbidden from speaking about what they saw and learned on punishment of death. And this was where both the historical Illuminati and the Freemasons got their whole swag. These guys were basically LARPers who were putting on costumes and doing rites to imitate what they had read and learned about these ancient Greek mystery schools. But what were these original ancient mystery schools really teaching? What did they really believe? Well, some of the best clues we have about this are actually to be found in the works of Plato himself. Christina Scheffer has argued convincingly that Plato's entire philosophy was really just his way of elaborating or further explaining the core mystical and religious experiences which he had as an initiate of the Eleusinian mysteries. Plato's famous student Aristotle was also an initiate of the mystery schools, and he gives us a clue as to what this initiation really consisted in. As he wrote, the initiands do not have to learn anything, but they have to experience something, and they have to be brought into a special state, only after becoming suitable, of course. Now, Aristotle is also our main and most authoritative source for the idea that Plato had a secret teaching, or as he called it, an unwritten doctrine. In his Physics, Aristotle remarked that Plato had used a certain concept in one dialogue differently than he did, quote, in the so-called unwritten doctrines. Now, these unwritten doctrines of Plato have been a source of great controversy among scholars, and if you go to Wikipedia, they have a whole page about this. And Wikipedia has this typical, they try to hand wave the whole thing away and say, nothing to see here, there's no conspiracy, it's nothing mysterious. As the Wikipedia editors write, the scholarly literature sometimes also uses the term, quote, esoteric doctrines, unquote. This has nothing to do with the meaning of esoteric common today. It does not indicate a secret doctrine. For scholars, esoteric indicates only that the unwritten doctrines were intended for a circle of philosophy students inside Plato's school. In Greek, esoteric literally means inside the walls. Presumably, they had the necessary preparation and had already studied Plato's published doctrines, especially his theory of forms, which is called his exoteric doctrine. Exoteric means outside the walls, or perhaps for public consumption. And this is very funny, they got a great lengths here to stress, it's not esoteric, it's not a secret teaching, but it literally is. Like what you just described there is the literal definition of an esoteric secret teaching. So, what was Plato's secret unwritten teaching? Did it have something to do with this secret society that he was known to be a part of, the Eleusinian mystery cult? Well, Christina Scheffer proposes that it does. She has an excellent article on this you can read. It's called Rhetoric as Part of an Initiation into the Mysteries, a New Interpretation of the Platonic Phaedrus. She makes what I regard to be a pretty much bulletproof case that what Plato is really referring to in the Phaedrus, and what really all of his exoteric philosophy is actually trying to transmit, are certain esoteric truths which can't be put into words. And this unsayable religious experience is precisely that which he and others experienced as a result of going through the mystery rites. As she writes, this paper will show that Plato alludes to an unspeakable experience in this passage again and again. It is the unspeakable religious experience of the mysteries. Philosophical rhetoric is only the preliminary. It is presented as the necessary part of a mystery initiation, which culminates in something unphilosophical and unrhetorical. In other words, it's an experience, a mystical experience. It's a knowing or gnosis which cannot be described in words. It cannot be argued or proved logically. You have to experience it for yourself to understand what it really means and what it really is and the tremendous good that it does for you. Or as Plato himself says, it makes the one who has it as happy as it is possible for a man to be. Now, the key word which Plato uses again and again in the Phaedrus is epoptia. Epoptia roughly translates as seeing. And as Scheffer notes, epoptia was also the name given to the final and highest stage of initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries. In fact, this word was so central to the Eleusinian mystery religion that its highest ranking members were actually called epopts. Now again, the word epoptia means seeing. And what does that remind you of? The all-seeing eye. And as we said, Phaedrus means radiance. What does that remind you of? Illumination, Illuminati, illuminated ones. And what is the eye of providence always surrounded with in every single depiction of it? Sometimes there's a pyramid around it, but in many cases there actually isn't. However, what is almost always present are rays, literal beams of light emanating from out of the eye. So the symbol doesn't just depict a human eye to represent seeing or epoptia, it's also Phaedrus, radiant. It's emanating an aura. It's luminous. And this symbol is referring to exactly what Plato was talking about in the Phaedrus, the whole key, the inner meaning of all his teachings. He is referring to the highest level of initiation into the mysteries. He is also talking about how sexual, Tantra induces a form of divine madness which gives you this radiant magnetism and allows you to perceive a higher order of reality, aka true seeing or hypoptia. This symbol is really code. It's a metaphor for the kind of transformation that initiation, true initiation, is supposed to give you. Yet not 1 in 10,000 people who use the symbol or even inscribe it into stone really understand what it actually means. This symbol is meant to represent you. It's a depiction of 2 different and complementary and mutually interdependent effects which this kind of self-development produces. The first, which we talked about at length in the first part of the video, is animal magnetism, radiance, aura, the animal magnetism that Socrates was described as having. And this is depicted in the form of the aura or radiant light which is emanating from the eye, just like an electromagnetic field. However, the second quality is one that we have not discussed, and this is the effect represented by the central symbol of the eye itself. And as we said, this eye represents hypoptia, seeing, the highest grade of initiation. But this is not the kind of seeing that you can do with your ordinary physical eyes. As Plato once put it, he who sees with his eyes is blind. So what kind of seeing are we really talking about here? We're talking about the ability to see or perceive invisible things, the invisible world, and not just the visible world that we can see with our eyes or know with our senses. And the key to understanding this secret esoteric doctrine is actually hidden in plain sight. It's right out in the open, right under our noses. It's in what's called Plato's theory of the forms. Now, I made fun of the Wikipedia page on Plato's unwritten doctrines a little while ago, but they do actually make one very good and very insightful point there. As they put it, Plato's unwritten doctrines, which is what we're talking about here, and if you wanted to sum it up in a word, it's radiance and or hypoptia. That is Plato's esoteric teaching, meaning the teaching he gave for true initiates who had been prepared to receive it, as Aristotle put it. It was for those who were, quote unquote, inside the walls, both figuratively and literally, referring to the walls of the Platonic Academy. However, Plato also had an exoteric teaching, meaning a teaching that he gave publicly and wrote about in all his publicly available works. And Wikipedia correctly states that Plato's theory of the forms was just this same exoteric teaching, meaning basically he would teach the theory of the forms to everyone, and then those who were extremely interested in it, or those who wanted to learn more, those who proved themselves to be serious students, he would then take those people aside and teach them the esoteric secret meanings. And in my opinion, and I think it's well supported based on everything I've said, an important part of that secret teaching was actually semen retention as a technique. I would be willing to bet that within the walls of the academy, for those who were serious students, Plato would have taught them, if you really want to understand what is meant by the theory of forms, do semen retention and then you will see. You won't just understand it intellectually with your mind, but you'll actually experience it for yourself and within yourself. This is the unsayable mystical experience that Sheffer talks about. And this is what seeing or hypoptia really refers to. It's a gnosis, a knowing or understanding, not just superficial thinking about it with the intellect. So in other words, semen retention is the master key that unlocks all of Plato, and it specifically unlocks Plato's theory of the forms. And having understood that, we can go back and look at Plato's theory of the forms, but we can do so now with very new eyes. In simple terms, Plato's philosophy centers on the idea that the physical world we experience is a flawed reflection of a higher, perfect realm of forms, or ideas. These forms are eternal, unchanging, and represent the true essence of things, like beauty, justice, and goodness. Plato believed that our senses can only grasp imperfect copies of these forms, and true knowledge comes from reason and understanding the forms themselves. Now, the crucial aspect, the missing link here, however, is semen retention. Semen retention is the way to perceive this higher dimension. That's what everyone misses, because Plato himself never wrote that explicitly. But if you read between the lines, that's exactly what he was hinting at the whole time. And the proof of this is not to be looked for entirely in Plato's writings themselves. The proof of it is actually in you. In other words, if you do these practices, you will see that this is what he's really referring to. You will see and you will understand and you will be transformed by doing these practices. So as we get into this, I want you to bear that in mind, that as I explain Plato's philosophy, what it really means, the secret truth behind it, on one hand, you can understand this with your mind and with your intellect as we go through this. However, alongside that, what you need to be doing after you finish watching this video is actually do the practice of semen retention. And I've made a lot of other videos about how to do semen retention the right way. You can watch some of them like this one and this one. So I'm not going to repeat myself too much about that here. But if you do semen retention for a long period, 4 weeks minimum, ideally more, and if you keep your mind pure throughout that time, meaning don't watch porn at all, if you do that, you will come to embody this symbol. That is to say, you will become radiant. You will become magnetic. You'll find that girls are looking at you, staring at you, even approaching you, all the stuff I described at the start of the video. And that is due to the stronger electromagnetic field which long-term semen retention gives you. However, in doing doing this practice, not only will you become magnetic to women, but you will also begin to get a glimpse into what Plato really means when he talks about seeing, hypoptia, initiation into the mysteries. And that is what I'm going to discuss now. Again, the true secret meaning of the all-seeing eye. And understanding this comes down to Plato's concept of the forms and what he called the two orders of reality. Plato says there are two worlds. There's the world of reality and there's the world of appearances. The world of appearances is the world we know, and it's changing all the time. This is the world we can perceive with our five senses: sight, smell, touch, taste, and hearing. But there is a higher world, a higher dimension, which we can call the true reality or absolute reality. This world never changes. It's completely static, it is perfect, and it is eternal. And this higher dimension cannot be perceived with any of our five senses. You can't touch it or taste it or see it or smell it or hear it. This unchanging and eternal dimension Plato calls the realm of the forms, or the realm of ideas. The forms or ideas are the true and unchanging essences of things. We cannot see these true and perfect forms in our world. All we can see are reflections or imitations of them, like shadows on a wall. Take beauty, for example. Plato says there is a form or idea of beauty which is eternal and immortal. It cannot be perceived with your physical eyes, and yet the form of beauty is more real than any particular beautiful person. And that's because beautiful people are only beautiful for a short time, relatively speaking, but eventually they grow old and ugly, and a little later they die. But beauty itself never dies. The form of beauty doesn't die, and it never changes. It is completely static. Now, in our world, the visible world we can see with our senses, there are girls who we could call beautiful. And Plato would say that insofar as any girl is beautiful, it's because she's temporarily participating in the form of beauty itself. Another example is geometry. For example, think of a perfect circle. Now, no one has ever actually drawn a perfect circle. It's impossible. And at the time Plato was alive, they didn't have computers that could generate an image of a circle. And in fact, they say even computers now can't generate a perfect circle, because if you zoom in, the pixelation means it's kind of jagged, so it's not really a circle. And yet everyone knows what a perfect circle looks like. No one has ever seen one, yet everyone knows what it looks like or what it should look like. And that's because Plato says the perfect circle exists and always has existed and always will exist in this eternal realm of the forms. But any actual circle we see in real life is like a poor reflection or a copy of that one eternal and real perfect circle. It basically borrows its essence from that eternal and unchanging perfect circle. And just as there's a form of the perfect circle, or the ideal beautiful woman, for example, there's a form for everything else that exists, big and small. There's the form of a car, the form of an airplane, the form of a computer. Interestingly enough, if Plato's theory is true that these forms are eternal and unchanging, then actually all of these things, cars and planes and computers, already existed in Plato's time in the ancient world. It's just that human beings hadn't got around to discovering them yet. But every single technology or invention that can exist or will exist in the future has actually always existed in this realm of the forms. In fact, no one actually ever invents anything new. They simply discover the form of something that already always existed, but which no one had noticed was hanging there in the air, so to speak. And then they pluck it out of the air and bring it to life in our world, but they didn't actually create it or invent it. They discovered it. And this connects with another fundamental principle of Plato, which is that we never learn anything new. We only remember. So following from this, the logical corollary of this is that there are all sorts of technologies and inventions which we have not conceived of yet as a species, things that will be invented in 100 years or 1,000 years. But the thing is, they're actually already here and right now. They're in the air, just waiting for somebody to pluck them out. And the people who do pluck them out usually become millionaires or billionaires as a result. So, it's funny, if anyone ever told you that studying philosophy has no practical application, I would beg to differ, because actually, to be honest, having a certain idea of the theory of the forms, which I learned in college, insofar as I've made a pretty large amount of money in business, which I have, a lot of that actually derives from what I've just said here. Because when you understand the theory of the forms, when you understand that everything that can possibly exist or will ever exist in our limited space and time dimension actually already exists in this higher eternal dimension, which is right here and now, and it's accessible right here and now, then making money out of nothing actually becomes quite easy. You basically just have to, number one, do a lot of research on the type of thing you're trying to build or discover, immerse yourself in other things that are similar, whether that's products you want to make or a book you want to write or something like that. And then number two, put yourself into a state which allows you to channel from this invisible world of the forms into our world. And so then by doing this, you can basically go into that realm of the forms and find things that are good or valuable or useful or interesting, but which don't exist yet in our dimension. You can pluck them out of the air, you can bring them back here, and you can make them exist in our dimension, and then people will pay you for it. And making money, that's the game. There's really not much else to it but that, the process I just described there. Obviously, there's other details and execution and so on that you need to handle, but that's the fundamental process process of how you create a new product or a new invention or an idea or a meme or a piece of art or a movie or a book or even a video like this one, it's understanding that it already exists before you've created it. It already exists and it's perfect. It's already fully formed. Your job is just to put yourself into a kind of shaman-like trance to access that world where it exists. Then you find the thing you're looking for and you do your best to bring it into existence in our world. You try to make the best copy of it that you possibly can. Now, there's one very important distinction here between Plato's philosophy and a lot of other philosophies, especially Eastern philosophies, which you may have heard of, which are very popular today. You know, there's an idea in Buddhism and in Hinduism that the world we see with our senses is illusory. They call it Maya. And Maya basically translates as magic trick. It's an illusion. You know, the world isn't real, according to them. But that's not what Plato was saying. Plato was not saying that our world isn't real. What he's saying is that our world is less real than this higher realm of the forms. And that's because the higher world is unchanging. It's eternal. Whereas in our world, everything is always changing all the time. Everything is always either growing or dying. You can't really get knowledge of something that changes, because if you know what it is or how it works now, by the time you've gotten that knowledge, it's already changed. So what you knew no longer exists. The only real knowledge, according to Plato, is the knowledge you can have of these unchanging things that exist in the world of the forms. Things like mathematical formulas. Now, the other very important thing here is that this higher world of the forms determines the things in our world. The invisible, according to Plato, is more important than the visible. And the way Plato describes this is with the analogy of a physical object versus its reflection in a mirror or in glass. And this is known as the analogy of the divided line. It looks like this. So, reality can basically be divided into three parts. The bottom two parts are what we know and can see in our normal state of consciousness. And here, our sensible world is divided into two. There are real physical objects, like a coffee cup or a plate or a person. However, there's also a lower order of reality, which we all know, and this is the copies or representations of those things. For example, the reflection of that coffee cup in a mirror or in glass, or it could also be the shadow which is cast by that cup. Now, it's not that the reflection of the cup isn't real. It is, but it's less real than the original object. Why is it less real? Well, for one thing, if you destroy the actual cup, then both the cup and its reflection will both be destroyed. However, if you just destroyed the reflection by smashing the mirror, for example, the original cup would be unharmed and unaffected. And this is an almost perfect analogy, says Plato, for the relationship between our world of visible objects and the invisible world of these unchanging forms which we cannot see. The objects in our world are merely like reflections or inferior copies of the true realities in this higher realm. For example, the higher level of the coffee cup would be the idea of the cup, the platonic form of the perfect coffee cup, the ideal cup. And it's a little bit of a silly example, but it actually keeps things very clear. And so, you know, if you think about it, just like smashing the reflection of a cup in the mirror won't destroy the cup itself, even if you then did destroy the real cup, you can't destroy the idea of the cup. You can't destroy the form of a cup on which that object was based. Ideas or forms are literally invincible. You know, it's like that old quote, like you can kill the man, but you can't kill the idea. And the same is true of everything else. You can kill a beautiful person, but you cannot kill the form of beauty itself. This makes it more real than any object in our world because it's more eternal, it's more durable, it's infinitely durable because it's literally invincible. And Plato discusses this in his famous analogy of the cave. In the analogy of the cave, Plato compares our normal level of consciousness to people who are imprisoned in a cave. He asks us to imagine a group of people who've lived in this cave since the time they were born, and they're strapped down with chains and restraints. They can't move or can't even turn their heads. Now, all these prisoners can see, all they have ever seen is one wall of the cave, and when people pass by outside, they cast shadows on the wall which these prisoners can see. Now, as far as those prisoners are concerned, those shadows are the real world. They've never known anything else. They have no reason to suspect that anything else exists apart from those shadows. And this, according to Plato, is a precise metaphor for our normal powers of perception, our normal level of consciousness. Our world, the world of physical objects, people, and so on, is merely a shadow, a pale reflection or inferior copy of this real world of the forms, the eternal and unchanging essences of things. And Plato says that the aim of philosophy is precisely to be able to learn to perceive this real world, this realm of unchanging and perfect forms, which is actually what gives our lower world its substance and its qualities. So how do you do this? How do you begin to perceive this world of the forms? Well, the college professors will tell you that Plato said it's all about, rational discourse and discussion, and maybe it's about learning geometry and mathematics and things like this. And this is wrong. That is the outer teaching, the exoteric teaching. It's merely the preparation someone has to go through. And this is what Plato wrote about explicitly and taught publicly to those outside the walls. But in fact, as we've been saying, there is a secret esoteric core to Plato, an inner teaching given only to those who've been properly prepared to receive it. And this is the use of semen retention and tantric sex as an occult practice to induce divine madness. Specifically, what Plato calls the highest of all four forms of divine madness, which is the madness of love, Eros, sexual desire, the sexual kind of love specifically. Now, why is sexual love or sexual desire so important to Plato? Why does he consider it to be the highest form of divine madness? It's because sexual desire, if you learn to transmute it alchemically, as we talk about in these videos on this channel, it's actually the fastest way to begin to perceive the higher reality of the forms. And in particular, it's about perceiving one form which Plato was very concerned with, and that is the form of beauty. Remember, we said there are forms of everything. There are forms of all shapes, all physical objects. Everything that can exist is a form. But there are also higher forms still, and these are the forms of more abstract qualities, such as the form of beauty, the form of justice, or the form of goodness. And so semen retention, Tantra, is fundamentally a way to begin to perceive the form of beauty itself. And that's because the longer you retain, the more your desire grows. And the stronger your desire, the more receptive you become to physical beauty in terms of the women who provoke that desire in you. And if you've ever done semen retention for a long period of time, you'll know this. It gives you a much greater appreciation for women and for beauty as such. Now, this is actually quite tricky because the longer you retain, the more horny you are, and the more attracted you are by beauty, the more tempted you're obviously going to feel to jerk off and have sex. And this is part of the kind of Faustian bargain of semen retention. Nothing in this life is free. Everything is a trade-off. Naturally, the great benefit you get from semen retention in terms of your magnetism to women and also this higher level appreciation of beauty, it has to be paid for some way or another. And it is paid for precisely by your struggles to control your own desire, which can be, as most guys know, very intense actually. Men are not made to be celibate. It is an unnatural state, but it's precisely because of that unnatural struggle that it gives you unnatural powers. So for Plato, Eros, sexual love, a burning sexual desire. This is the fundamental way by which you can begin to perceive the invisible higher dimension of reality, which is normally veiled to our eyes. And again, this is actually exactly the same as what the Taoist and Tantric masters of China and India taught. They also put all the emphasis on Eros, that is sexual energy, or in Taoism it's called Jing Qi. And they said that cultivating and transmuting this energy is the key to unlocking and opening the doors of perception. So Plato, once again, is basically tantric. He's a yogi. He is no different whatsoever from the Eastern sexual alchemists. He's actually saying the exact same thing as they are, particularly if you read books like the Symposium and the Phaedrus, yet no one ever connects them together. People read Plato as if he's this kind of dry, boring, analytical philosopher, but he's not. He's a tantrika, and he's actually teaching a form of what in India is called Kundalini awakening. And this brings us to what's called Plato's ladder of love, or I would call this more like a psychedelic ladder of consciousness. This is in the Symposium, and we can represent it like this. Now, if you read the Symposium and you don't know what to look for, it won't seem like there's much going on here. However, if you understand that semen retention is the master key that unlocks Plato, and you combine this with the concept of the ladder of love, then this is the secret. This is the answer. This is the essence of Plato's secret teaching. It's actually the instruction manual for how you crawl out of the cave and into the world of reality. It's the framework, the technique for beginning to finally get a glimpse of the reality behind appearances, and it also, into the bargain, makes you intensely magnetic to people as well. And the way you do this is simple. It begins with desire. Love, but not love in the sense we often mean in English, like, the love you have for your family, but specifically Eros, the sexual form of love, which Plato identifies with the love of beauty specifically. And this is obvious. If you're a man and if you're at all sincere with yourself, when you fall in love with a girl, what's really happening is that you desire her intensely, and specifically what you desire in her is her physical beauty, the beauty of her physical body. Many people don't want to admit that, but that is the truth, and that is indeed exactly what Plato says. So that's the first step, the lowest rung on this ladder. It's loving or desiring a particular girl because you desire the beauty of her physical body. And this is the level that we're all familiar with as men. It's our factory settings. It's innateness. And so we can all start here. Level 1 is desiring a particular girl's beautiful body. Now, the next level up is to desire or to love or to appreciate the bodies of all beautiful girls. And this level is still not that difficult to explain. Again, almost all men understand what this can mean, and all men have some appreciation for this. To love not just one particular girl, but all beautiful girls as a category, including maybe ones you haven't actually seen yet or laid your physical eyes on. And again, we're still focused just on the level of purely physical beauty here. The beauty of girls' bodies that we can see, touch, taste, and smell. However, from this point of loving and appreciating all beautiful girls, it's quite natural from there to begin to cultivate an appreciation for the essence of beautiful girls themselves, or for the essence of beauty itself. And this is the third level, which is desiring, loving, appreciating beauty in itself. Or in this case, we might also say femininity in itself, what Goethe called the eternal feminine. Now at this level, you are no longer restricted to loving actually existing physical bodies. You now love and you have an appreciation for something that is higher, more real, and also more eternal than actual physical bodies that are made of meat and that will decay and die. Of course, you still desire and love the real physical bodies of living girls. Just because you're at this higher level doesn't negate any of the lower levels. You still have these lower levels of desire and appreciation as well. But now, on top of these, there's also a new and a higher form of desire or appreciation. You don't just love beautiful girls as such, but you actually love beauty as such. The eternal form of beauty, which all those beautiful girls share in or partake in to greater or lesser degrees. And this actually gives you an entirely new way to appreciate women, to appreciate feminine energy, because every single girl you'll ever meet is completely unique and different. And so every single one, however imperfect she is, actually has something different to teach you about the form of beauty itself. And so now you don't just see the visible world of bodies, but you are also beginning to be able to perceive the invisible world, the reality behind appearances. And you do this, says Plato, precisely through love, through sexual desire. Because sexual desire is the one thing, the only thing, which all men have, no matter their level of development, and which allows you to get on the first rung of this psychedelic ladder of consciousness towards perceiving beauty in itself. And so as you ascend this ladder, through doing semen retention, through keeping your mind pure, like I've talked about, you do still love beautiful girls and their bodies, but now you begin to perceive and to love the essence of those beautiful girls themselves, the essence of beauty itself, which unlike those girls, and unlike anything we can see with our eyes, is eternal and is immortal. It's unchanging. And this is an experience you have. It's not an intellectual thing. It's much closer to what Buddhism calls a satori experience, a moment of sudden awakening or enlightenment. It's often accompanied with feelings of indescribable joy and inner peace. And it's specifically an emotional experience. It's an experience of the heart, not of the mind. An example of this that I really like that I read about recently, this was from Abraham Maslow, the famous psychologist. He coined the term peak experience to describe moments like these. Peak experience is an altered state of consciousness characterized by euphoria, often achieved by self-actualizing individuals. And one of the examples of a peak experience which Maslow gave is actually very relevant here. He tells the story of this US Marine he once talked to, had been stationed on an island in the Pacific Ocean during the war. And throughout the time he was stationed there wasn't a single female on this island. So he hadn't seen a woman in a very long time. And when he got back to base, he said he saw a nurse, and this caused him to go into a peak experience, or what in Buddhism would be called a satori experience, because he said it suddenly struck him that women are different from men, that they're soft and curved and gentle, and as different from men as horses are from cows. Now, on the surface, you might say, well, that's obvious, well, of course women are different from men, we all know that. But simply knowing that superficially with your mind is very different from appreciating it fully for the first time. Not just with your mind, but also with your emotions, with your heart. It's like you were blind before, but now you see. And if you do semen retention, and particularly if you stop watching porn for a long time, you will begin to have experiences that are exactly like this one described by this Marine. You begin to really see women for the first time. You really appreciate them for the first time. And not in a goofball feminist type of way, like, respect all women or women are all angels, but it's like the scales drop in your eyes and you realize, like, my God, how marvelous. I'm so fortunate to get to live in a world where creatures like this exist. And the important thing here is that this is not attached to desire or attachment or grasping or control or possession at all. You don't need to have the woman to appreciate her. You don't have to have sex with her. You can love what she represents and embodies, the eternal form of beauty or femininity that she's participating in. And you don't need any physical world outcome or, like arrangement of physical world matter to actually have that pleasure. It transcends physical matter. It transcends the physical. And actually, it's kind of ironic, because when you do have this satori-like appreciation for women's beauty for the first time, for their essence as females, as women, and if you then actually get one of these girls and, you get her into bed and you have sex with her, what will happen immediately after you ejaculate, most times, is that you will lose this sensation and you lose this great pleasure, because it was precisely the surplus of desire or eros inside you that was giving you this higher mode of perception. But when you get rid of that desire by ejaculating, literally when the semen vacates your body, you no longer have access to this much finer mode of perception. And this is why Plato says you should never actually have sex in the sense of consummating the relationship, i.e. ejaculation. Because if you can manage to have a girl you love and even to touch her and caress her and so on, but not ejaculate, then you can basically just continue to keep ramping up this erotic madness more and more. But it's actually a form of madness, a divine madness, which allows you to perceive this higher dimension of reality. So, semen retention or Tantra for Plato is like a psychedelic elevator of consciousness, which allows you to perceive higher and higher forms of beauty and truth. Now, the highest form of all, according to Plato, is what he calls the form of the good, or the form of goodness. Goodness in itself. And Plato says the form of the good stands on a different level to all these other forms. He compares it to the sun in our world. The sun both gives life, warmth, and light, and also gives us the ability to see, because without light, there is no sight. And Plato says the form of the good in itself is categorically different and higher and better than any other form which borrows from it, such as beauty or truth or pleasure and so forth. And so ultimately, the ladder of love, semen retention, tantra, whatever you want to call this, it has value not just because it makes us magnetic and gives us magical powers, which it does as a matter of fact, and if you don't believe that, you should try it, but also because this practice basically allows us to go from perceiving only that which is visible to our senses to being able to perceive higher things like the form of beauty, and then from there, we may just have a shot at being able to eventually catch a glimpse of the form of the good itself, which is essentially, if you wanted to put this in monotheistic terms, pretty much like merging with God. And so, to close a loop here, this is what this symbol really means. It refers to climbing out of Plato's cave, being able to perceive the invisible world of the forms, which we've been talking about, in particular the form of beauty, and beyond that, the form of the good. Now, as we said, this symbol has three fundamental characteristics. The first is a human eye. The second is a triangle around the eye, and the third are the rays of light or an aura emanating from the eye. We said those rays really refer to magnetism. They refer to the aura, the actual animal magnetism or radiance which having this perception will give you. And the eye refers to this new form of perception itself. It is really a symbol for the word epoptia that comes up again and again in Plato, which was again also the highest grade of initiation in the Greek and Roman mystery cults, such as the Eleusinian mysteries. The word epoptia we said translates as seeing, and of course it's not the seeing you do with your physical eyes, because again, as Plato says, he who sees with his eyes is blind. The seeing represents what the Buddhists call the Satori experience or sudden enlightenment, the ability to see things as they really are. To see not just this world of change which we can perceive with our senses, but the reality behind appearances, which is one of fundamentally unconditional love or cosmic love. This unchanging, eternal, and immortal absolute reality, which is the realm of the forms or the mind of God. And the highest of those forms is the form of the good, which you might identify as being God itself. This is also what Christ was referring to when he said, I will give you what no eye has seen and what no ear has heard and what no hand has touched and what has never occurred to the human mind. This saying of Jesus was lost for nearly 2,000 years and was only discovered in 1945 when the Nag Hammadi library was unearthed in Egypt. It's from a secret gospel called the Gospel of Thomas, sometimes called a Gnostic gospel. And what Jesus was referring to in this secret wisdom teaching was exactly the same thing Plato was talking about. There is a higher level of reality which cannot be perceived with the five senses, and yet this higher level of reality is not a hallucination or some kind of, subjective religious vision or something. It is no less real than our so-called real world of physical objects, and actually it is more real, not less real than our world, because the things in our world are merely like shadows or reflections of the true and eternal essences that exist in this higher plane. Perceiving this higher dimension is the aim of all occult initiation and all religious or mystical experience, and this is what not only Plato but also Jesus' secret teachings in the Gospel of Thomas are really about. Both Jesus, real name Yeshua, and Plato, real name Aristocles, were initiates, and both were describing and teaching the same exact experience of enlightenment or illumination, although they use different terminology. What Plato calls radiance, Jesus calls becoming a person of light. Now, of course, the last element of the symbol, which we didn't cover yet, is the triangle around the eye. This triangle represents the number 3. This fundamentally refers to the fact that for this kind of awakening to happen, a man needs to have developed 3 sides of his being. The first being the physical body, which needs to be made strong, healthy, vital. We do that these days through training in the gym, for example, and Plato also did the same. Second is the intellect, which also needs to be highly developed. And the third is the emotions, and more specifically, it's courage and will, what in Plato is called thumos. Now, the fact that the eye is locked within this triangle means that unless a man has developed all 3 sides of himself, the body, the mind, and the emotions, he can never attain this kind of awakening. And the development of these 3 sides of a man's psyche is discussed in detail in Plato's Republic. Most people have one of these sides overdeveloped at the expense of the others. They have an overdeveloped mind, but an underdeveloped body, or vice versa. Or they might even have both mind and body developed, but have not developed their emotions. In other words, they're cowards, they're afraid, and this keeps them locked in place, unable to do what they want to do in life. And at any rate, when you have developed one of these at the expense of the others, when all 3 are not fully developed, this creates disharmony, which sounds like this. But when your body, your intellect, and your emotions are all equally highly developed, it produces a harmony, which sounds like this. And that is what the triangle or pyramid in this symbol represents. A three-part harmony between the body, the mind, and the emotions, which is the fundamental precondition for having this kind of awakening. So that's what the symbol of the all-seeing eye really means. It's not about some elite pulling the strings behind the scenes, although it may have come to represent that. This is actually a symbol of you. It's a symbol of the kind of transformation that is meant to happen to you and within you when you do this work. Now, to wrap this all up, to bring this back to the title of this video and the core promise here, become magnetic to women using Plato's secret teachings. As I've been saying, when you have gone through this transformation, when you have unlocked this new way of seeing fundamentally, this is what makes you magnetic. This is what gives you aura to women, and life becomes very different. I mean, girls will practically be chasing you down the street when you do this work. I've given many examples of magnetism that I've experienced myself in other videos, things that people really wouldn't believe. You know, I mean, literally it's been as dramatic as girls I've never met before literally running up to me in the street and jumping into my arms. Or even just last week, for example, you know, I'm at a bar, sitting outside, minding my own business. Girl comes up to me, stands in front of me, starts trying to get my attention. She actually drops her phone in front of me, so I'll pick it up for her. Eventually, she sits down beside me, drapes her arm over me, we start kissing. And this is, you know, 22-year-old girl, upper middle class, obviously from a good family, you know, probably pretty rich actually based on where she said she lived. Slim, healthy, fit, clean, beautiful long hair, no tattoos. Not trailer trash we're talking about here, but, you know, desirable, normal girl, well educated, just comes up to me out of the blue, sits down next to me and starts kissing me right away. Within 20 seconds of meeting, she's biting my lips, she's giving me hickeys. And I don't know about you, but this kind of thing never used to happen to me before I started doing semen retention, okay? You know, I don't want to belabor the point here because I've talked about it in other videos, but there's obviously something going on here, and there's different theories on this. Some say it might be to do with pheromones. I think that's probably part of it. But personally, as I've said before, I believe it's actually electric or electromagnetic at some level. It's a field, an electrical current produced by your body when you're doing semen retention and when you're doing this kind of work. And by this, I mean not just abstaining from ejaculation, but also abstaining from porn, keeping your mind pure. This seems to be very, very important for magnetism for some reason, possibly even more important than the retention part. Viewing porn, for whatever reason, seems to completely destroy or mess up this attractive field. And I don't know exactly why even just viewing porn cuts off this ability, but I know that it does. And so when you do these practices, semen retention and the abolishment of lust, i.e. no longer watching porn, if you can manage to do this over a long-term basis, meaning for a few months or longer, it literally does become like opening a portal to another world. Women treat you very, very differently, for one thing, but also you start to see women differently. You begin to see them as they really are. You see the eternal feminine that animates them and of which their physical bodies are only a reflection. You come to dwell in a world of inexhaustible beauty and pleasure, but it's a subtle kind of pleasure that can't really be described. You know, it's not dependent on anything that's happening in the physical world. You know, when we normally talk about pleasure, like sexual pleasure, for example, that usually assumes that there has to be some arrangement of physical matter, atoms and molecules in the physical world. You know, like for me to experience pleasure, I need to have sex, and that means, literally, if you think about what it means, my dick has got to be inside a woman's. In other words, physical matter, certain molecules in the world, they have to be arranged in a certain way, or else I can't be happy. I can't have pleasure. But this higher form of pleasure we're talking about is completely unlike that. Apprehending beauty in itself, it doesn't require matter to be arranged in any particular way. When you are illuminated in this way, when you've been transformed in this way that Plato is really teaching us, you can look at a girl who's, you know, serving you coffee or something, or you can go out in nature, go to a park, and just something like a girl passing you on the hiking trail or making eye contact with a girl on the train, and just seeing her, it's almost nourishing somehow. It's like it feeds your spirit. The beauty which she represents is like food for your soul, for your higher self. And you don't need anything to happen, sexually or otherwise, to get fed in this way, to get nourished. You don't need any particular arrangement of molecules in the physical world in order to experience this subtle, finer form of pleasure. Now, in certain occult traditions, they talk about having a foot in both worlds. In other words, you have a foot in the material realm, the realm of visible things, but you also have a foot in this transcendent spiritual world, the realm of the Platonic forms, which is essentially also the world of heaven. And this is possible because, again, heaven is not somewhere else. Heaven is here and now. Heaven interpenetrates our world a lot like radio waves. And to be clear, I'm not saying heaven is radio waves, but it's a good metaphor. You know, right now in the room you're in, there are radio waves passing through the air, even passing through your body. And in exactly the same way, heaven also exists right here now. This is what Jesus meant when he said that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. He meant literally at hand, as in like stretch out your hand. Heaven is right here where your hand is right now. It's not something that exists in some other place, like up in the clouds. And it's not something that will exist in the future. Heaven is here and now, but most people can't see it because they're limited by their eyesight. They don't realize they're already in heaven right now. So what semen retention does for you, and what Plato was really hinting at, is that, again, if you do this for a long enough time, I'm talking 6-8 weeks or more, and if you also completely purify your mind, meaning don't allow yourself to watch porn ever during that time, if you do that, you will begin to perceive this invisible dimension I'm talking about, what we might call the dimension of heaven. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to go out in nature, go to a park, go to a hiking trail, nature trail, go to a spot where there's a lot of natural beauty. If you do this on like a Sunday afternoon, it's best because people are off work, and so you'll see not just nature, but people, like families walking around with their kids, couples, cute girls jogging, people walking their dogs and so on. And if you do this while you've also been doing semen retention and keeping your mind pure for at least 4 weeks or so, you will begin to see the dimension of heaven in just the way that I'm describing. You will see heaven, not just in nature, but in other people. The philosopher Sartre, it's funny, it's almost like he's satanic. He has a famous quote, which is like the diametric opposite of the truth. He famously said that hell is other people. And the truth is precisely the opposite of this. Heaven, the dimension of heaven, is only visible in other people and in animals, plants, living beings, life itself. And when you are in this special state, you will be able to perceive and see not just the physical bodies of people, but also the dimension of heaven, which those people, men and women, children, animals, are part of. In other words, it's like you can see their souls. You can see the essence of things, the true reality behind appearances. And this gives a kind of pleasure which cannot be described. And it makes you glow. It makes you radiant to other people. It's like a higher form of food. It's a kind of food that doesn't just feed your physical body, but it feeds your soul. And according to Plato, this is also what makes us immortal. It's what gives our soul the ability to survive after death as a still functional, coherent unit, and it gives our soul the ability to come to dwell in the happiest and best realm of the afterlife there is. And if you think about it, it's actually not hard to understand why that might be. Because if you've had this experience, if you've been to heaven while on earth, so to speak, if you visited heaven before you died, and if you even know how to induce this state in yourself that allows you to get back there whenever you want to, then obviously it's going to be much easier to find heaven, to know what to look for after you die. Because it's like the difference between someone who knows the city they live in like the back of their hand and knows how to get to a certain place versus someone who's never been to that city before and it's their first time being there. The person who's never been to heaven while still alive, when they die, it's very easy for them to get lost and confused, to kind of lose their way and get stuck in some lower dimension. But if you do this work in life, if you go to heaven while you're still alive, and if you keep going back there, not just once, but many times, it's like you become familiar with it. You know what it's supposed to look like. And so when you die, your soul will naturally know what to look for and it will know the route to get back there. And this is exactly what Plato says happens in his book, The Phaedo, which is all about the soul and the afterlife. This dialogue takes place just after Socrates has been sentenced to death and he's surrounded by his friends. And they're extremely puzzled and almost disturbed by how calmly Socrates is taking all this. Because as he says, I'm afraid that other people don't realize that the one aim of those who practice philosophy in the proper manner is precisely to practice for dying and death. Those who practice philosophy in the right way are in training for dying, and they therefore fear death least of all men. Be of good cheer then, my dear Credo, because you are bearing my body only. All right, so that is how to become magnetic to women using the secret teachings of Plato. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me get the word out for future videos, helps me with the algorithm, etc. But more importantly, to thank you for watching this video, I want to give you the free book that I wrote right now. It's a short guide called The Ultimate Guide to Making Women Approach You, no matter your looks, age, or money. You can download this right now. Just click the link in the description, enter your name and email on the next page, and I'll email you this free book immediately. Make sure to grab that now while I'm still giving it away for free. And when you do that, you're also going to be subscribed to my free email newsletter where I give you new content every single day on how to magnetically attract women by being yourself. No tricks, no inauthentic bullshit, but how to have that magnetically attractive vibe and personality that makes girls chase you by being more fully who you really are. That is what we talk about in the newsletter. So make sure to grab this free gift now when you sign up. Click the link below to do that now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the other side.